You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Friday, December 8th, 2017. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. What a week it has been. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in, and we've got lots and lots of stuff to talk about. And, of course, in hour number 3, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us, as she usually does, with her unique perspective on the world. And I want to start off, again, by commenting on that horrible fire situation in Southern California, and I've been watching it very closely because these fires are hitting a lot of places that Claire and I knew and used to go to when we were living there in Southern California, and so it's starting to feel very, very personal. The winds right now have dropped a little bit, not all that much. It's still gusting to 60 miles an hour, and what's making these fires just go completely out of control is when you have a 60-mile-an-hour wind, it can take some very large embers and carry them for miles. And, of course, being fanned by the wind, they will stay burning and hot. And that's really what's going on here, and they just don't have enough equipment to stay ahead of this right now. So I saw a photo of the fires taken from the International Space Station, and it was just dramatic, seeing all the smoke out there, and I would not be surprised if this gets going much further, if it's going to start interfering with the air traffic going in and out of Los Angeles International Airport. So if you're planning any air travel in the next week or so that goes through LAX, you might want to pay careful attention to scheduling and make sure that there hasn't been a change of some kind. All right, the world is still reacting quite angrily to Donald Trump's announcement that he recognizes Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, which, by the way, does not actually change the legal status of Jerusalem. Donald Trump does not run the world. He may think he does, unfortunately, but he doesn't. And the condemnations continue to pour in, even from people who are supposedly American allies. The Saudis have condemned Trump's Jerusalem recognition, saying it's going to lead to serious consequences. They said it was an irresponsible and unwarranted step, and it's going to be a drastic regression in the efforts to try and move forward a peace process. And they're absolutely right about that. Iraq's Grand Ayatollah Sistani is condemning this U.S. decision and saying that it is hurting the feelings of hundreds of millions of Arabs and Muslims. And it does not change the reality that Jerusalem is an occupied land which should be returned to the sovereignty of its Palestinian owners, no matter how long it takes, calling on the Ummah, or the Islamic nation as a whole, to combine its efforts for that purpose. The Lebanese parliament has affirmed their support for Palestinian resistance against the Jerusalem decision. And Jordanians are talking about annulling their peace treaty with Israel. And King Abdullah is currently meeting with the Palestinian leadership. Hamas has issued a statement saying, "We call on King Mohammed VI to convene an extraordinary meeting of Al-Quds Committee." And by the way, Al-Quds is the other name for Jerusalem. And apparently there's a call for the Arab nations to find a way to put pressure on the U.S. administration. And supposedly Arab foreign ministers are going to be holding an emergency meeting in Cairo tomorrow to discuss their reactions to what Trump has done. Now, I've gotten a whole bunch of emails from people saying, well, what can those Arab nations do? Israel has nuclear weapons. They're militarily weak. They couldn't possibly do anything to change the outcome. Well, yeah, they could. And it comes on down to those valves on those oil pipelines, because of all those Arab nations at the same time were to declare an oil embargo against the United States economy would implode. And that should have been a serious consideration in Trump's decision-making on this move of his. But there's all kinds of negative consequences, and apparently in his rush to please his friends, Sheldon Adelson and Netanyahu and Jared Kushner and all the rest of it. Trump just said, yeah, we're going to go ahead and do it. Nothing will come of this, and boy, was he wrong on that one. Egypt is rejecting the U.S. decision to move its embassy to Jerusalem. Right now, all foreign embassies are located in Tel Aviv, which is the internationally recognized capital of Israel. The Sudanese parliament calls to recognize formally the state of Palestine with Jerusalem as their capital. Now, there's something you need to pay attention to here, and that is that Palestine has indicated a willingness to share the city. They want East Jerusalem, which under the United Nations partition plan does belong to them, and that's what they want for their capital of their Palestinian state. But Israel wants the entire city. They don't want to share. And that's been the problem all along. They don't want to share anything with anybody. It's all theirs, 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 theirs. But Palestine and the other nations have indicated they're very happy with the idea. If Israel wants their part of Jerusalem as their capital, all well and good, as long as East Jerusalem is the capital of Palestine. It's fair and it's balanced, and it's never what Israel is willing to go along with. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are rejoining our network. The Jordanians have demonstrated in front of the U.S. Embassy in Amman demanding it be shut down and the expulsion of the U.S. diplomatic staff. Now, if Donald Trump intended to set the Middle East on fire, he's done a great job. If he didn't want to get this kind of response, if he didn't see that it was coming, then he has really messed up. Moscow officially opposes the Jerusalem recognition. This is coming from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And the violence is continuing in the West Bank, in Gaza, near East Jerusalem, and it is now resulting in deaths of Palestinians. Hundreds are protesting in Cairo and Alexandria. That's the headline. I looked at the photo. It looked like it was more like thousands. Thousands demonstrating. Trump has really lit a match under this situation. Now, article coming out of UNS.com, absolutely right. Trump's decision on Israel will torpedo U.S. influence in the Muslim world. That is clearly already happening. All these Arab nations are turning away from the United States and saying, you're not an impartial negotiator or an unbiased arbiter between what's going on. You are not part of the peace process. And good old Vladimir Putin, the global statesman, is already on his way to visit Egypt and Turkey to discuss with them Trump's Jerusalem gambit. So Trump just pivoted the entire Middle East towards Russia. Good move, given how dependent we are on Mideast oil. Now, apparently, Vice President Pence was planning, or is still planning, a visit to that part of the world later this month. The Palestinian Authority has now said they're not going to meet with him. He's not welcome. They have nothing to say with him, mostly because they understand any promises the United States government makes are completely, utterly worthless. And so here's what it really comes on down to. This recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and the moving of the embassy to Jerusalem has zero upside for America. It's all downside. Israel gets all the upside, America gets all the downside. Now today the United Nations Security Council had their emergency meeting on what's going on, and Nikki Haley was in there saying, oh no, the U.S. is still dedicated to the peace process. We believe peace can be achieved here, but we have to stand up for Israel, and we have to protect Israel from the unfair treatment by the United Nations, signaling that whatever the Security Council tries to do, the U.S. is going to veto it. But her words are ringing hollow. If the United States was interested in a peace process, they wouldn't have done this. So it is a huge mess, and already we're, with Putin making these goodwill trips all over the country, he's not going to stop with Turkey and Egypt. He's going to be visiting all of those countries. He may try and step in as the new broker for peace in the Mideast But it's very clear the United States government has lost a huge amount of influence in the Middle East. They're pivoting to Russia, all because of what Donald Trump did to please Sheldon Adelson and Bibi Netanyahu and Jared Kushner and AIPAC. And apparently, and this is what concerns me most, he did it without really considering the ramifications that were going to happen. And that's a bad quality in a president. Now then, let's get on to domestic politics. Big breaking story. Beverly Nelson, who was one of Roy Moore's original accusers, has just flushed her credibility down the Al-Qaeda, along with that of Gloria Allred. And she's come on out and admitted that she basically added some of the writing in that infamous yearbook inscription. Now, what she's saying that she did, in response to all these people saying it's obviously two different hands, you know, turn the yearbook over to experts so it can be verified. She said, well, she added the date and the notation about the restaurant as a personal note here. That's the new story. There's only one problem. And again, we posted this picture to whatreallyhappened.com. If you look at that inscription in the yearbook, it's written in two different colored inks. Now, the last name of Roy Moore, that word Moore, is written in the same color ink as the notation Nelson now admits she put into that yearbook. All the rest of the inscription up to the name Roy is a different colored ink. So obviously the name Moore was added along with that notation to come up with this evidence. And poor Gloria Allred, we heard her hemming and hawing. Well, yeah, I don't really know, but this is what my client is saying here. And by the way, I'm going to rub somebody's nose in the dirt here a little bit because they deserve it. Do you remember when this story first broke and questions were first raised about that yearbook inscription, and the Washington Compost came on out with a report saying their document expert said there was no question it was all written by one hand? Wrong again, Washington Compost. You've been caught putting out more fake news. We're getting word that Representative Trent Franks, Republican of Arizona, is about to resign from Congress. This is coming from two Arizona Republicans who are aware of the decision. And the word coming on out is that he is resigning in the face of what are described as forthcoming claims of inappropriate behavior. I guess he's decided not to wait for the stuff to be made public. He's just going to get on out of there, get out of the public limelight. Apparently, Blake Farenthold, who's a Texas Republican, is facing an ethics probe over payment of taxpayer funds to settle a harassment lawsuit. And the word coming out of that is there may be as many as 40 legislators about to be exposed on this. What a bunch of slime balls. Can we not do any better for a government than these people? Now, over at the Department of Justice, a gentleman named Bruce Orr has been demoted from the position of Associate Deputy Attorney General and kicked out of his posh fourth-floor Department of Justice headquarters office because apparently he concealed meetings that he had with the author of the Trump dossier, Christopher Steele, and with Fusion GPS, the so-called opposition research, opposition creation firm that provided the dossier. And he hid that meeting, and he's now been demoted. Now, as you know, we had a hearing with the current director of the FBI, Chris Wray, in front of the House Judiciary Committee. And Chris Wray admitted that the FBI's Inspector General was looking into whether improper political considerations led to Hillary Clinton not being prosecuted, and hinted saying that there could still be charges, that the decision to clear Clinton could be reversed over improper political considerations. Now, there's one small mistake in what Wray did. Hillary Clinton was never cleared. She never went to court. She was never exonerated. She was simply not charged, and those charges could be brought to bear at any time for the numerous Title 18 felony violations which James Comey himself admitted Hillary committed. She was not cleared of the charges. That's not the same thing as simply not being prosecuted. Now, Chris Wray was also trying to dodge questions about how big a role this Russian dossier played in securing these FISA warrants. And he came on out with this ridiculous idea that, well, this information is classified. You know, we can't share. It's classified. And apparently, the House chairman informed him that the Judiciary Committee has primary oversight of the FISA court. And so, yes, of course, they can see classified information in a classified setting. So they want to see what's going on there. And a lot of this seems to be tangled up with Strzok, that FBI agent who was demoted for his anti-Trump tweets. But if you look at Robert Mueller's staff, most of them were heavy Hillary Clinton donors. They're all anti-Trumpers. If just being anti-Trump was a reason to be removed, Mueller wouldn't have a staff. So there was something else going on there why Strzok was singled out, and this appears to be it. And Congressman Jim Jordan is hot on the trail here. Jim Jordan, Republican of Ohio, basically came on out and said, asked the director, did Peter Strzok help produce and present the application to the FISA court to secure a warrant to spy on Americans associated with the Trump campaign? Ray's response was he wasn't prepared to discuss applications tied to the FISA court. Jordan kept up the pressure. Ray refused to answer. And then Jordan came on in and he said, let's remember a couple of things about the dossier. The Democratic National Committee and the Clinton campaign, which we now know were one and the same, paid the law firm who paid Fusion GPS, who paid Christopher Steele, who then supposedly paid Russians to put together a report that we call a dossier full of all kinds of fake news, National Enquirer garbage, and it's been reported that this dossier was all dressed up by the FBI, taken to the FISA court, and presented as a legitimate intelligence document that became the basis for a warrant to spy on Americans. And remember, somewhere along there, the FBI itself threw $50,000 into the pot. They gave Christopher Steele $50,000 and said, find some proof that any of this stuff actually happened. And he never did. And Strzok appears to be tied up in that business as well. So it's getting very ugly out there. Now, I love the comment made by Representative Mark Meadows, who said, we need a special prosecutor to investigate the investigators. And he came on out and basically said, it's time for Jeff Sessions to do his job or step aside and let somebody else do it. I wholeheartedly agree. We have our second FBI director in a row, our second attorney general in a row, who are trying to protect Hillary Clinton and the narcocracy. Let's get Sessions out of there. Let's get somebody in there who will really do the job. Somebody from outside the Beltway, like Larry Klayman, or Tom Fitton, or Alan Favish. It's time to get real people in there to do a real job, not just grab an alligator out of the swamp and expect them to do something about the swamp. Now, Chris Wray felt that he had to leap to the defense of the FBI after Donald Trump's tweet saying the FBI's reputation is in tatters. And he came on out with a stirring defense of the FBI. Now, of course, anybody who's my age and who remembers the 1960s remembers the FBI abuses of COINTELPRO. So the FBI's reputation has actually been in tatters for quite a long time. More about this when we come back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And grab your paper and pencil here, because if you want to help keep Republic Broadcasting and what really happened on the air, now's the time to basically take action here. It's Christmas. Send us a Christmas present, a little Christmas donation here. You know, be generous. We've been good people all year. We've been good little girls and boys over here. Anyway, the address is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. If you want to phone in a donation with a credit or debit card, the number is 800-724-2719, extension 03. So we're talking about how Chris Wray is trying to defend the FBI after Trump said the reputation is in tatters. And it is, and it has been, going back at least as far as COINTELPRO. And we know they participated in the cover-up of the murder of Vincent Foster. They participated in the cover-up of the shoot-down of TWA 800. That's what these guys are really all about. And contrary to the movies and TV shows that you see, they're not very bright. Remember when Frederick Whitehurst, he'd been the former chief of the FBI lab, and he blew the whistle that the FBI lab was rigging lab results to favor the prosecution. It was a huge stink. A lot of cases had to be reopened. A lot of wrongfully convicted people were let go. But I want to share two incidents out of the history of the FBI that will illustrate just how smart these people are. And the first one has to do with a British spy back in 1941, Dusan Popov. His code name was Tricycle, and on August 10th, 1941, that's August of 1941, handed the complete plan for Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor to the FBI, and the FBI said, nah, this is unbelievable, and they threw it out. And this was written up in Pearl Harbor, The Verdict of History by Gordon Prang. It's in the appendix, based on records from the Joint Congressional Committee on the Investigation of the Pearl Harbor Attack. The second historical event that tells you just how smart the FBI is. Back in 1964, there were accusations that the song Louie Louie, as recorded by the Kingstons, contained obscene lyrics. And the FBI spent 2 years trying to analyze the recordings to determine what was actually being sung before somebody reminded them that the lyrics were on file in the U.S. Copyright Office. That's your FBI for you, the fake Bureau of Investigation. All right, we're going to go ahead and take a phone call here. Dustin in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Before I talk about Trump, I just want to say, where I live, I went to Aldi's today, and there's a homeless encampment behind the food store, and somebody came in, bought $100 worth of groceries for them, and brought it to them in the back.
Yeah.
But I'm just the point I'm trying to say, Mike, is they're all over the place. You know, I mean, the economy's not good. I see, Mike, I see the stock market, which it's rigged. We all know that, and I see just that they rigged the numbers, how the unemployment rate is low. We all know because they don't count people after. But when is it going to come a time when you just see rows of unemployed people living in tents and say there's obviously a problem? Nobody's fixing it. Trump's not. There's no infrastructure happening. You can blame Trump or the establishment, but there's nothing being done. America's not great again.
No, it isn't, and it's not headed toward being great again. And the reason nothing is being done about the hungry and the homeless by the government is spending all their money on invading other countries and making them hungry and homeless.
There's no factories being built. There's nowhere for these people to go to work. Maybe a small part-time job. The time you get paid, paying gas, food, insurance, this or that, you're behind. The debt slavery system, you just can't, you can never, and then people say, well, you should get in the stock market. Well, what happens if you don't have the money? And then if we can't buy food and gas, we certainly don't have money to put into the stock market. In fact, even most ethical brokers will say, if you don't actually have risk money that you can afford to lose without impacting your life, you shouldn't be in the stock market at all. And but again, right now, we're in worse hardship than during the Depression of the 1930s. And nobody wants to admit it. Nobody wants to admit things are this bad. Nobody wants to admit we're in a wartime economy. But we are. We absolutely are. But people don't realize why are all these countries printing money out of thin air? You know, so the corporations can buy their stocks back and jack up the stock price, and the stock market looks good. And there's going to be investors, and stuff like regular people who have the money. But when they fail, like the banks did, they're going to bail them out, and the taxpayers get stuck with the bill. I mean, hey Mike, I heard something about the
Dustin?
The tax plan?
Dustin?
Yeah.
Dustin, okay, we got to take a break for commercials. Don't hang up. I'm going to come back to you after these words from our sponsors, okay?
Mm.
All right, we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And right now, the Roy Moore campaign is having a press conference where they're basically talking about the fact that Beverly Nelson has now changed her story regarding the inscription on the yearbook. So they're fighting back on that one. Okay, we're talking with Dustin in New Jersey, and we're talking about the true state of the economy and the fact that we're both in an economic recession, if not a full-blown depression. At the same time, we're in a wartime economy, and the nation is basically bleeding to death right now.
Yeah, on the tax plan, people don't understand. They said it's 1.5 trillion. It's actually 5-point-something trillion. And then after 10 years, like the taxes are going to go up for the middle class if there's any middle class left. I mean, it's ridiculous, right? I mean, on Trump, I want to switch to Trump with this whole middle. I mean, you don't throw gasoline on a house that's burning. The Middle East is destabilized. So basically, all of a sudden, he comes out with this. I mean, it just don't make sense. Anybody who thinks Trump is on their side still, man, wake up. I mean, this was a bad move by any estimate. If Saudi Arabia cuts off the petrodollar and oil, us getting oil, there's not enough for us being sufficient to just for this country to survive, Mike.
You raise a very good point. You raise a very good point. In addition to an oil embargo against the U.S., all of these other Arab countries could simply abandon the petrodollar deal because that deal was predicated on the U.S. being an honest, impartial arbiter in the Middle East and being able to protect these Arab nations from Israeli aggression. And Trump just demonstrated that's all gone now. So as far as these Arab nations are concerned, the petrodollar deal that goes all the way back to the Nixon administration has been destroyed from the American end. And so that would be the second punch that they could do.
Yeah, and then also Americans don't realize, we're not China's number one economic partner. It's Europe.
Yes.
So, I mean, people don't realize, this country uses a lot of oil. Sure, we buy a lot of stuff from China. But, I mean, if something hits the fan there, do you really think this country's going to survive on the petrodollar being gone and oil coming in from Saudi Arabia being gone? Because it's flowing to China already.
Yes.
And it's obviously going to be flowing from Russia and Saudi Arabia to China. They're already pivoting.
Yes.
So I mean, this was just a bad move. I don't understand if anybody thinks this was a good move. They're crazy because it's not. It was just why at this particular time too? I don't understand.
From Israel's point of view, Israel may be realizing that the United States is on the verge of a collapse, and so they just figured we're going to get everything we can get out of the U.S. government before they're gone, and this was one of them. But again, the whole motivation for this decision was not based on foreign policy considerations or long-term ramifications. It comes out of this religious fanaticism of certain Israelis. That this is their land and they're God's chosen people, and Jerusalem is supposed to belong to them, and that's all they think about. And they don't think about the harm that it's going to cause to other people. And again, there isn't much that the Arab nations can do to Israel itself because of Israel's nuclear arsenal. But the Arab nations could very easily take down the United States of America with an oil embargo and dropping the petrodollar deal. And the United States does not have the resources to invade and conquer the entire Middle East. They still they lost in Syria. They're losing in Afghanistan. They're mired in Libya and Yemen. And if they have to go up against major players like Iran and Saudi Arabia at the same time, and if Iraq turns on the United States, that's it. The U.S. is out of the Middle East, and they're cut off from that oil, and we don't have enough domestic oil supplies online to make up for that shortfall. Now, apparently, Trump is opening up a whole bunch of the Alaskan oil reserves for development, but it's going to take a little while to get that drilled and brought online.
What about Israel, though? Don't they rely, it's a welfare state. They don't have their own food, right? It's imported for the most part. They have a small amount, but they're not self-sufficient. They can be blockaded too, just have embargo on,
Well,
there's a lot of other countries that'll buy the stuff. In the Middle East, you got China, I don't know, man. I just thought this was a bad move. And I was like, what the heck is going on with Trump?
It's unquestionably a bad move. It's unquestionably a bad move. Israel has been lobbying for this for decades. Congress has even passed several resolutions saying we want to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and all previous presidents have refused to do so under consideration of what the backlash is going to be. And Trump just blew on through, and it's another reminder that he came into that White House as naive about real politics as Jimmy Carter. And Trump is going to be a single-term president. I'm making that prediction right now. And this absolutely is alienating what remains of his support.
Mike, if we make it there, Mike, isn't it amazing he didn't get rid of Sessions or any of these other people? Didn't dump anybody in the FBI, didn't dump anybody in the CIA or the NSA. It's the same group of people still there. What is he waiting for? What is people who think he's gonna fix things? When are they gonna realize he should have done it by now? We've been talking about this for how long? You've been talking about it, people have been calling in.
He's a year into his first term, and none of this stuff has been done. They're still playing with demo versions of the wall, and he's done some of the stuff he promised on immigration. But in terms of curtailing foreign intervention, he didn't do that. And Hillary Clinton is still walking around free. Now, there are some members of Congress who are trying to change that. But Trump has turned out to be a complete disappointment. Whether he was threatened, blackmailed, or bought, or whatever, we did not get the Donald Trump we voted for. And that is an absolute fact.
And he has the power to get rid of these people, Mike.
Yes, he does.
That's the thing. He has, and he's not doing it. So right there, he's a lost cause. I'm sorry for people who call him, who still support him. He failed us.
Yes.
It's time to, we should have got somebody in who was like a Joe Six-Pack, believe it or not, who works at an assembly line, 7 days a week or something, because, we got somebody in here it seemed like it's just part of the system. Might not be the same system, but it's a system similar.
I agree with that, but, because of all the rigging and the primaries and everything, it came down to a choice between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. And as I made it very clear last year, the primary reason I was supporting Donald Trump was I didn't want Hillary Clinton in that White House out of concern that, we'd already be at nuclear war at this point. And certainly Hillary probably would have gone along with the same harebrained idea of declaring or recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital. But it's very frustrating election after election to be voting a candidate, and yet the core policies of the United States government remain totally unchanged.
Yep. The lesser of two evils, like you said, and everybody else says it's still evil.
And it's a stupid way to run a country.
All right, thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We got a bunch of calls. I'm going to try and clear them out and then get back to the news here. Etheric Dave from Crucial Nonsense, thank you for waiting. What is on your mind today?
Aloha, Michael. First of all, I want to wish you and Claire a happy belated 23rd anniversary.
Thank you.
You all have the greatest blessing life has to offer, and none of the Zionists and all the garbage going on in life can really take that away from you, so I'm very happy for the two of you. The reason I called is I used to live in California about 20 years ago. I found a nice little place called Silverado in the easternmost part of Orange County. Absolutely gorgeous. But what drove me away from there is the second time we had a fire a little bit too close to home. That's when I handed my resignation into work and everything was all set to go. And the night before we left, we had a big rainstorm, and the mudslides started. And I'm really glad that I quit, because that would have taken my 45-minute each-way commute to work to about 2.5 hours. And I was so happy to get out of there. This is going to be the gift that keeps on giving, because once they get that fire out, all that brush having burned away, we're going to have epic amounts of mudslides. This is one of the biggest fires I remember. If that Thomas fire was a little bit farther south, there would be no more Los Angeles. That is a gigantic fire, and it's nowhere near getting close to being wrapped up. You know, even here in Arkansas, you know, the Forestry Service is always doing controlled burns and trying to keep the wildfire danger down, and we don't have the humidity problems. We don't have the Santa Ana problems. It's absolutely ridiculous that this keeps happening over and over and over again. It's like breaking news. California's on fire. Yeah, when is it not on fire? They have not taken care of all that stuff, and I really feel for those people, because this is a long way from being done.
Well, one of the issues that's been raised recently is that California's program of keeping the brush under control through controlled burns has been severely hamstrung by the state's environmentalists, who think everything ought to be just left the way it is, and, you know, how dare you go on in and damage these beautiful thorn bushes and everything. And that contributed to the overburden. And all of that, when it gets dry, it becomes, you know, this incredible fuel source.
Absolutely, and if they really wanted to protect all of that stuff, a little bit of proactive measures about, you know, fire break roads and controlled burns and all that stuff keeps most of that stuff intact, you know, in perpetuity. But we'd much rather spend money on illegal aliens and, you know, bombs and bullets and Israel. And in case anybody had any doubts at all, Trump is another Zionist puppet. And I'm afraid to say that we're not going to get anything in there. They're not allowed to be in the election if they're not a Zionist puppet. So, you know, it is what it is. We got a mess on our hands, Michael. Anyway, have a great weekend. Relay my belated anniversary wishes to the lovely Lady Claire. Take care. Aloha.
Aloha, and we're going to switch over to Mark in North Carolina. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Mike, I gotta differ with you. I wanted to talk really about the FBI, but you got me going with this thing now. I think I'm going to make a prediction.
Yes.
The Saudis are not going to do anything. The Saudis are not going to do anything. I'll tell you why. I've done research on the Saudi royal family. Got possible tie-ins between certain Jewish sects and certain Islamic sects, mostly the Wahhabis. Tie-in is the, what do you call those people again? In Central Asia, the
Khazars.
The Khazarians, yeah, the Khazarians. That's the tie-in. It seems like the Saudi royal family is not really Arab, but originally come from, and a lot of the tribesmen wandered into this area known as Saudi Arabia, into that part of the desert, from Khazaria, which is really Georgia, Azerbaijan, but part of the Ukraine, and Armenia. Basically Central Asia. Now, some Jews also are Khazarians, or are descended from Khazarians. Not most, but some.
Well, actually, yes, it is most. All of the Ashkenazi are descended from the Khazars. I want to insert a comment here. A lot of people have tried to make a big deal over the fact that if you go back far enough in history, there's a connection between the Saudi royal family and the present Israelis, but you have to go back a very, very long way to do that. And, you know, blood connection is nice, but it only goes so far, and you need look no further than, for example, the history of the royals in Britain to see that throughout history they've killed each other off. Very close family relations have been killed off as a threat. We've seen various rulers in Rome executed their own brothers to prevent threats to their power. So I don't think that's really going to be a limiting factor, especially with the degree of recklessness we've seen from Crown Prince bin Salman. In the end, I think the Middle Eastern nations are probably very, very angry that they've been played for suckers by the U.S. government and Israel all this time. And I think their reaction is going to be one of anger, and they're not going to be feeling very close either to the United States or to Israel. And certainly the indications are they're going to pivot toward Russia. I don't think Saudi Arabia is going to directly attack Israel for the same reason none of the other nations will directly attack Israel, because of Israel's nuclear arsenal. But what they can do with an oil embargo or dropping the petrodollar is they can bring a great deal of harm to the United States of America, and then Israel is going to be cut off from one of their parasitic hosts. Of course, Israel has other countries that they bleed dry for money along with the United States. So it's a very dynamic, unstable situation. Trump just made things a whole lot worse.
All right, here's where I disagree, okay? First of all, if you have noticed with the wars between Israel and the various Arab countries, Saudi Arabia has never been involved. It's always been actually against secular Arab countries like Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and others. It's never been against Saudi Arabia. The Saudis and the Israelis seem to have been working together since the inception of Israel, and I've read stuff that the Saudis actually supported an Israeli state in the first place. I think they know that there's a connection, and I think a guy like, what's the guy, Kushner? I think Kushner is behind a lot of this stuff, and I think he knows a lot of this stuff. I think he belongs to a certain sect of Judaism that probably knows.
Okay, I think you're a little obsessed on this religious angle. Okay, because we're talking geopolitics here, and one thing Saudi Arabia has to realize is they need to get along with their neighboring nations. And if they're seen to be siding with Israel on any of these issues, it's going to get very tense for them. Because I think Saudi Arabia, if all the other nations in that part of the world unite together and say, we're going to cut off the oil to the United States, and we're going to drop the petrodollar, I think Saudi Arabia is going to go along with that.
Well, that's where I think you're making a mistake. I don't think they're going to cut off anything to the United States. I think they're scared to death of Iran. And I don't think
they are at all. I don't think they are at all. They're certainly scared of Israel. And what Saudi Arabia has been doing is going along with U.S. policy as basically a follow-along with that petrodollar deal, because Saudi Arabia became very rich off the petrodollar deal. They didn't want it to go away, but now Saudi Arabia is in serious economic trouble, partly because of U.S. actions against Russia. So that relationship is definitely eroding. Anyway, Mark, I need to let you go. We're coming up here on a commercial break. We got more callers waiting on the line when we come back. Meanwhile, interesting little story. The judge in the case against Mike Flynn has abruptly recused himself with no explanation. Just stepped down, said, I don't want to be part of this. It turns out he's an Obama appointee who also sits on the FISA court. So something else is happening there. We'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to go back to the telephones here. Sherry in Texas. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you, Mike. This is about China.
Okay.
First of all, we have to collapse. We just absolutely have to collapse. Bernie Sanders, I don't think, would have been able to be any better than Trump, and he wouldn't have spoken those magic words, "You are very fake news." And Romney and Obama and Bush and all those, it would have been a disaster if we hadn't gotten someone outspoken. Now, China has a banking system, and I wish more people could understand how wrong we are. I think you had a guest on that pointed this out to us. But they lend money that has value, and then they receive interest paid by the borrower, the people that borrowed the money. They receive that interest. Now, some of that money the big bank of China receives is put aside for future borrowers. It's real money, and it's there for the next borrower. The remainder is invested and used for infrastructure, so you won't have mudslides, and it goes to all the little smaller banks all over China. So they use the money that they lend in a wonderful way. And if this is socialism, we need to understand the difference between, I think, democratic socialism and Marxist socialism. Even the dictionary's definition for socialism is confusing. But it's democratic socialism is a good thing. I don't think Bernie, he was already swayed. he was already made to turn against the people right off the bat. We need to collapse, Mike, and I think I'm looking to China and Russia, because Russia knows how to treat its people right and feed them right, and China knows how to deal with money right. And we just absolutely have to collapse and get out from under the Romneys, the Obamas, and the Bushes, because it would have been so bad if Romney had won, and it never would have been any better, and it won't be any better under any of the other ones until we completely go under. And I'm just glad that we're in the position we are with our eyes open when we go under, so we won't be led in the wrong direction. But what do you think of Russia and China as being so superior to us that we're going to have to just look to them for the answers, and to possibly socialism?
Well, first of all, any system is only as good as the people who are in control of it. And any system, no matter how wonderful it is when it starts out, like the United States, can fall victim to being commandeered by a group of individuals who see the nation as existing for no other reason than to make themselves personally rich. Now, I still think capitalism, the way it used to be done before private central banking, is a good system. If I'm forced to choose between fascism and socialism, I'm going to choose socialism. But I'm in agreement with you. This government is unredeemable. It cannot be saved. We're going to have to let it collapse, and I think the collapse is already underway. Okay,
well,
we got.
I wouldn't mind falling in. Okay.
Yeah, Sherry.
That's fine.
All right,
Thank you,
Sherry.
Mike.
Thank you, Sherry. We got to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. And before we take any more phone calls, I want to get some more stories in here because there's some important stuff here. Now, as you know, we're coming up on that Alabama special election, and they're fighting for that Senate seat. They've tried this smear campaign against Judge Roy Moore. That has basically imploded with Nelson's admission today that at least part of that yearbook entry she wrote. She's claiming she wrote it just as a notation. But if you look at the ink color, whoever wrote that notation, which included the initials DA, who was Moore's assistant during a legal process that Nelson was involved in, the word Moore, the last name of Moore, is written in the same color ink as the part Nelson now admits she wrote. So I'm trying to get that information over to the Roy Moore campaign. But it looks like the Democrats have learned absolutely nothing from last year, and serving as a possible reminder that Donald Trump's Commission on Election Integrity ought to be doing its job right now. Apparently, the Secretary of State for Alabama is saying that because this is a special election, they're exempt from the laws requiring the preservation of the ballot scans. And basically, Alabama counts their votes like New York does. Paper ballots get fed through scanners, which photograph them and generate a saved image and a tally. Alabama is breaking the law by not keeping the images, which means a recount would be impossible in case of allegations of election fraud, which if you have a Democrat in the race, there's going to be election fraud. We saw that last year. So apparently there is now a lawsuit that is going to court, and apparently the judge has agreed to hear this, to get a court injunction to order the protection of all election materials from next Tuesday's special Senate election, in case there is a challenge. So we'll see what happens on that. This could turn into another courtroom debacle like Florida in 2000. And apparently somebody has already found stacks of sample ballots already marked for Doug Jones. So it's getting sticky. All right, let's go back to the phones here. Al in Canada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Your last caller was talking about China and their money. It's not money. It's a banknote, just like Canada's banknotes, United States banknotes, Great Britain's banknotes. It's all a loan at interest. It's all, not real. It's crap. It's bull. And like you always say, the reason why the system will never work is because there is never enough of this crap in supply to actually pay the debt because of the compounding interest.
Well,
it's always running away at the end.
China seems to be moving away from that and toward a gold-backed yuan. Same with Russia and a gold-backed ruble. And that's what Gaddafi was trying to do down in Libya with the gold dinar. Is all of these world leaders understand that private central banking is a curse on their country. Andrew Jackson understood it. John F. Kennedy understood it. And they're trying to free the world from these slave masters. But right now China is in a period of transition where some of their money is, as you say, created out of thin air. But China does exercise a lot more direct control over their central bank as opposed to here in the United States where the central bank just does whatever it feels like doing. And they'll go through this idea of how the president gets to nominate the chairman of the Federal Reserve, but that's purely for decoration. I've seen a video of former Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan admitting the Federal Reserve answers to no U.S. government authority. You really ought to read their charter sometime. They don't even pay taxes. The only taxes they pay are the property taxes on the land underneath their buildings. They don't pay any other taxes at all.
None.
And they've never been audited.
People pay the tax of inflation for them, right? In Canada, the Central Bank of Canada, the Bank of Canada is owned by the people, right? Our banks were bailed out just before yours were, just because it took so long for it to go through Congress and the Senate. And you know what, Mike? It was over 115 or $20 billion up here, which is more than 10 times what your quote-unquote bailout was. But here's what happened in Canada. The bank's balance sheets were wiped clean. The CEOs gave themselves big, huge bonuses. And this Ponzi scheme, runaway real estate market just kept going. It still hasn't imploded. And now Ontario wants to raise the minimum wage from $11.40 an hour to $14 an hour come January. And most of the economists are saying that 50,000 jobs in Ontario will be lost instantly, and it's going to happen. I could see it because I'm right here in the middle of this stuff. There's record debt level in Canada, not just with the governments, which is 100% of GDP provincially and federally, but with the people. That's never been seen before. Record low interest rates. Mike, this is a recipe for an implosion like no one's ever seen before on the face of this planet. And so, the United States economically isn't too bad when you take other countries and the rest of the world in consideration.
Well, I disagree. I mean, simply saying that I'm not drowning as fast as the guy next to me is not really going to make the situation any better. There's no question we're drowning. I'm sorry about the guys who went before me, and, congratulations to the ones who drown after I do, but I'm still drowning over here. And we're in that same situation. The debt has spiraled hopelessly out of control, but the people who are making all this money, they don't want to let go of the system because it works for them. They're in the stage where the real tangible physical wealth of the nation is being ripped from the American people whose labor produced that wealth and put in the pockets of the bankers. And their goal is a new feudalist society where private land ownership is gone. In fact, they'll go back to a system where the land owns the people rather than the people owning the land. And you won't be able to do anything without the permission of the lords, the bankers. And we're dangerously close to that with all this talk about a cashless society where you literally need to appeal to their lordships, the bankers, to buy your food, to pay your rent. And yes, you're doing it electronically over a computer, but it still amounts to that same sense of servitude.
Yeah, that is true, and we can see this with the Uber, these patents or whatnot on cars. You can't even. We're at the point actually in Canada, Mike, where you can't even work on your own car. We're getting to that point.
Yes.
You have to have a mechanic's license to buy parts to fix it. Other trades are like that. You can't fix your own furnace. You have to have a gas fitter 1 or 2 license in order to buy the parts. It's all going that way. But we've talked about this so many times. It's done. As far as Trump, he's there almost a year. It broke my heart when he did that Jerusalem thing. I mean, it really put a nail right through my temple. And I'm still holding out that there might be some hope left for the guy. He's got 3 years. But I don't know what to say, Mike. I'm sorry.
I don't think so. If there was any reality to Donald Trump, we would have seen it by now. Anyway, listen, I need to let you go. We're going to take one more phone call, and then I do have to get back to the news. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates rejoining our network, and we're going to go to Ray in Texas. Ray, thank you for waiting so patiently for your turn. What is on your mind today?
Mike, good afternoon. Nice to talk to you. Long-time listener, first-time caller. Very quickly, two things on Trump. I'd like to know if you had ever heard what I'm about to tell you. I read this in a paper some 25 years ago. It had to do with a helicopter flight out of the heliport, I think, in New York, where he and the other members of his board of directors, et cetera, were going to board this flight for some type of trip. At the last minute, he canceled, and that helicopter crashed and killed all. Have you heard that?
I have not heard that, no.
I had not heard that either in the election process or since he was elected. Okay. I wondered if you had heard this. I don't know whether I had read this recently or heard it, but it had to do with a woman that had been in the service industry for some type of elite, and it appeared that it was somebody in the Secret Service or somebody in the know in the inner circle that had told her that Trump was picked 2 years ago prior to the election basically to become a wartime president. You heard that?
No, that sounds like the kind of stories that were being put out about Trump last year during the election by the Hillary Clinton campaign, most of which turned out to be garbage. Anyway, Ray, thank you very much for the phone call. We've got another caller waiting on the line. James in Tokyo, aloha, welcome back to the show. What's on your mind? James, are you there?
This is James from Tokyo.
Yes.
Hi, Michael.
Hi.
Michael, stop with this anniversary stuff. A fine, lovely, harp-playing angel like Claire should have been with me. I mean, while you are smart,
I got to her
smart.
first, so there.
You like Get Smart. I like Get Smart. You drive a 20-year-old Honda, and I drive a 10-year-old Mitsubishi. You have one of the best radio shows in the world, exemplifying your high intellect on all current affairs, and I drive the 10-year-old Mitsubishi.
Okay.
Anyway, happy anniversary. Wish you all both the best for that.
Well,
and
thank you very
I
much.
wish you many, many more anniversaries, and happy for both of you. Always about that. Concerning Trump, it's very interesting because on one side he stops this the shipping embargo on Yemen, which is a form of collective punishment, and yet he's also encouraging violence in the Mideast with the Jerusalem thing. What do you think about that? And number two, yeah, he was slurring his words.
Let's take these one at a time. First of all Trump has done is ask Saudi Arabia to lift the blockade, and so far there's no indication Saudi Arabia has done so. So Trump may have just done it to try and soften. Trump may have just made the announcement to try and soften the impact of the statement about Jerusalem.
Yeah, that seems like a very good answer, Mike. Yeah, maybe it was just to soften the impact because, I think maybe you're right about that. And that was just something that's really bothering me. What do you think about the slurring of the words, like the United States, you know?
I hadn't really noticed it that much. I'll keep an eye out for it. But it could indicate, I don't know if his teeth are real or implants or dentures or something, or maybe he's starting to succumb to the politician's beverage of choice, which is a 3-martini lunch.
Well, he doesn't drink alcohol.
Well,
but,
that's what we've been told.
It's possibly implants, but it's also, they're saying now that the whole case against Russiagate is falling apart, the next thing that they're going to go after is, Alzheimer's and this and that, and, maybe he could be drugged or this and that, because this whole thing is going down with the Russiagate. I mean, it seems like there's a lot of collaboration between Hillary, the FBI, and, other people.
Yeah, there does seem to be here, but I'll tell you right now, questioning Trump's mental capability is not a stone that Hillary, or for that matter Nancy Pelosi or Maxine Waters, ought to be hurling, given their recent performance as well. And there is another very obvious explanation for the slurring of words, and that is the job of president is a very tiring one, and he may just be getting tired.
Yeah. Personally, I felt, number one, it was just like exhaustion. It's not easy being 70. It's not easy. I'm 54. It's not easy sometimes doing what I do. But, the guy's like 70-something, and it's not easy just doing what he's doing. But I believe pretty much maybe your idea. Maybe he had some kind of, his teeth look really damn good. Maybe it was just some kind of stuff with that. So that's what I'm just thinking.
All we know is that
and
we
anyway,
don't know.
That's all I had to say.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go, and I'll tell you what, we're going to take one more phone call, and then we're going to close the phone lines because I'm really way behind in my talking points. So let's talk to Ramsey in Canada. Aloha, Ramsey. Welcome to the show. What is on your mind?
Yeah, hello, sir. I just want to make one point. See, sir, one of the guys that called in like 2 callers ago, like Mark.
Yes.
He was talking about, he said that Saudi Arabia supported the partition plan when Israel was created, if I recall correctly. You see, sir, he's completely wrong about that. Saudi Arabia was one of the main people that voted against the partition plan and against Israel. And Saudi Arabia sent letters to Harry Truman, who was the United States president at the time, not to support Israel because see, sir, it's exactly similar to what you mentioned, sir, because of the economic boycott. Saudi Arabia said to Truman, we're going to boycott you to support Israel, but the thing is, the boycott didn't last very long. And see, sir, he's also wrong when it comes to he said that Saudi Arabia, the people there came from, the tribe from there came from Khazaria or Asia or whatever.
Yeah.
He's wrong about that. I don't know where he's getting his information from.
Well, there's a book called The 13th Tribe that lays it on out, and it's been verified genetically, along with common sense. If you look at the Ashkenazi Jews, they have this very lily white pale skin that makes it obvious they are not descended from anybody in the Middle East.
Yeah. But see, so didn't he say that Saudi Arabian people came from Khazaria?
He said their family tracked back to it, and I don't know that there's any real hard evidence about that. The reason I was dismissive of that is he's trying to build a case for a linkage between Israel and Saudi Arabia, that going back to a family connection that's hundreds of years old, and that really isn't all that big a factor when you're talking about global geopolitics. And like I said, if you look at the history of Britain or ancient Rome, you have rulers who are killing their own family members, brothers, aunts, uncles, just to hang on to power. So this idea that there's going to be that kind of blood loyalty between the current Saudi family and the government of Israel is very, very thin indeed. And that's why I basically wanted to pull him off of that.
Yeah, I agree with you. It doesn't make any sense.
Okay, well, thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go, and we're going to close the phone lines because I've got a lot of stuff to get through before the lovely Lady Claire joins us on the show. So, up in Massachusetts, former State Senator Brian Joyce was arrested this morning and charged in a federal indictment. Now, nobody is saying what the indictment is about yet, other than that he may have used his position as a legislator for personal gain. Ooh, gee, there's a shock. I mean, let's be honest, that's kind of seen as a perk of the job. So I have a feeling there's probably more to these charges than just using his position for financial gain. Something else is going on. Now, apparently, according to Denisov, the director of the Institute for Peacekeeping Initiatives and Conflictology, the Trump administration may be reconsidering their relations with Kiev because of mounting contradictions. And this dovetails with reports that we were getting last week about how Saakashvili is leading the call for the impeachment of Poroshenko, and American forces were literally rehearsing how to evacuate Poroshenko from Kiev if he's driven from power. And so it looks to me like the U.S. is tired of Poroshenko. He's not delivering on his promise, and so they're going to replace the regime yet again. Now, interestingly enough, Israel has declared air superiority for the next 40 years in the Middle East because they have the F-35 stealth fighter. We are Butch, we have this fighter, we have air superiority over the entire Middle East. Maybe a bit premature, what with pieces of the plane falling off in flight, but then Israel does like to brag. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And in addition to parts falling off the F-35, the engines occasionally exploding, not being able to fly near lightning, so forth and so on. We also have other examples of the products from America's military-industrial complex, like the Freedom-class littoral combat ships, corrosion problems, Independence-class littoral combat ships, drivetrain problems. In fact, both those classes of ships are already going to be scrapped. The Navy says they don't work. The modular design that was the whole basis for these ships, they can't get it to work properly. So that's okay. We'll just throw them on the scrap heap and we'll build a whole new class of littoral combat ship. It's not our money we're spending. Then we have the Zumwalt stealth destroyer, not stealthy, drivetrain problems. F-22 still can't fly too high without asphyxiating its pilots. And now we're getting this report that last month, remember there was that story about how a ballistic missile was fired from Yemen toward the Saudi capital last month. And Saudi Arabia claimed they'd shot it down with the U.S. Patriot missile system. But the New York Times is quoting an arms expert and a research team. They examined photo and video evidence and found that Saudi Arabia may have missed the missiles entirely using the Patriot. 0 for 0, or batting 0, whatever metaphor you want to do here. All right, let's get into the economic news here. The de-dollarization of the world is continuing. China and Iran have now reached an agreement for direct currency exchange. They're going to do trade back and forth using their own domestic currencies without going through the U.S. dollar. Again, I can already hear the shrieking and gnashing of teeth over there at the Federal Reserve. No, you can't do that. You have to use our dollars. Apparently, there's a big legal fight getting ready to crank on up in the European Union, where Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic are basically going to go to court against the European Commission over this idea of refugee quotas, where the EU has gone to all the member nations of the European Union and said, you will take in this many refugees. Mahi dictum est. And, of course, Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic, along with pretty much all of the rest of the member states, have had enough of the refugees. It's causing all kinds of problems. Economic problems, crime, infectious diseases being introduced, and they want it to stop. Now, as you know, we're in the middle of the Brexit. We're hearing talk from other parts of the EU that they want to break away. But the former president of the European Parliament, Martin Schulz, and he's in the running for German Chancellor, came on out there and said that the goal is a United States of Europe no later than 2025. Ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Euro. And so I hope the German people are not going to vote this guy on in, because his goal is to erase what remains of the individual sovereignty of the member states of the European Union. And by the way, that's what happened here in the United States of America the reason it's called the United States, plural, of America is because each of the states started out as a sovereign state. And they were united in a confederation. But over time, as Washington, D.C. grew in power, it arrogated to itself more and more authority and federalized the entire country. And I think if we look at the way the country is being run today, that was a really bad idea. Now, apparently, over in Britain, Jacob Rees-Mogg is topping the next Tory leader poll with a landslide. Theresa May is clearly in trouble, and she's struggling. She's caught between a rock and a hard place on the Brexit deal. The European Union wants more. Britain says they've already given too much. And so it looks like Theresa May be about to pack her belongings over at number 10 Downing Street. Now, remember that story we ran a little while ago about how holders of medical marijuana cards here in Hawaii were being sent letters to turn in their guns? Well, that caused a bit of a stink and a backlash. And now the chief of police of Honolulu is saying, no, current gun owners with medical marijuana cards are fine. That's you know, we're not touching them. But if you have a medical marijuana card, you will be denied a new firearm permit. So it's a halfway measure. Don't want those dangerous potheads having guns. It's not the potheads you have to worry about. It's the meth heads. If you want to deny meth heads guns, sure. But they can't get the meth heads because they don't have identification. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. There has been another unfortunate incident involving a police killing. Now, it actually happened a while ago, but the reason it's news is because the police officer was cleared of murder charges. And the story is basically that there was this 26-year-old man who basically was gunned down in cold blood. And the police told this gentleman, Shaver, to exit his hotel room, lay face down in a hallway, and refrain from making sudden movements. And, of course, he was unarmed. The guy was unarmed. And there's actually video footage of what was going on, where Shaver is literally crawling toward the officer, and he's crying and saying, please don't kill me, please don't kill me. And Officer Brailsford opens fire and shoots this guy dead. And he should have been convicted of murder. But I guess in this country, police can kill with impunity. Now, a little while ago, we ran this story under the politically correct asylum category, where there was this proposed rule in Delaware that would have allowed school children from kindergarten through high school to self-identify as a gender or race without the consent of their parents. And the parents got really upset, wouldn't you? And they've succeeded in getting Delaware to revoke this rule. And in any event, what does self-identification for gender or race have to do with reading, writing, and arithmetic? What are schools doing to our kids? They're certainly not educating them. We've had another big scandal where the graduating class of a high school, turns out most of them can't read. They're not being educated. They're certainly being indoctrinated into liberalism. I self-identify as a peach tree. It's ridiculous. What a waste of money, time, and resources. Homeschooling really would be better. Or we need to crack down and get back local control of school curriculum. Because the more the federal government gets involved in education, the worse that education becomes. And by the way, probably a lot of people don't remember this, but local control of the school curriculum was one of the original agendas of the Black Panthers. And this was before they became militant. They didn't walk around with guns. They weren't talking violence. They just organized themselves, and they called themselves the Black Panthers because they were black, and they just wanted a cool name to go with it. And what they were agitating for was local control of the school curriculum, because they didn't think the schools were really preparing their children realistically to enter society and participate economically. And the other thing they wanted was guaranteed breakfasts for those children in the ghetto, because if the kids aren't eating in the morning, their brains don't have the necessary nutrients to function in school. We've got a program over here at one of the churches that Claire and I are involved with. The same thing. They put together these food bags for school children for the last week of every month, because the food stamp money won't make it through an entire month here in Hawaii. And if the kids are not eating properly, if they're not eating breakfast, they cannot do well in school. And it was only later, when the FBI infiltrated the Black Panthers and started to mess around with them, that they got militant, and then that was followed by various dirty tricks like the Black Panther coloring book to make everybody say, ooh, bad Black Panthers, we're not going to listen to them anymore. We're not going to listen to the grievances of the black community. They must be terrible people if they did that coloring book, which, by the way, was an FBI program. It was part of COINTELPRO, specifically to fan up distrust and hate between white and black people. The Black Panthers had nothing to do with it. Actually, somebody tried to plant the coloring book on the Black Panthers and said, here, let's send this out to all your people. And the Black Panthers said, no, are you out of your mind? All right, so let's talk a little bit about computers. A lot of stuff going on there. Apparently, the CEO of Apple, Tim Cook, is out there saying he shares China's cyberspace vision of developing a digital economy for openness and shared benefits, which sounds like a really good idea until you realize that it's happening at the same time net neutrality is coming to an end. So what Cook is actually saying is the Internet is going to be taken away from the public and turned over to corporations for more profiteering and money-making. And the rest of you people, you just go back to getting your news from the corporate media. So, now, this story appeared yesterday in the Daily Mail. It's your daily dose of booga booga. And the headline was, an ISIS hacking group threatens global cyber attack starting with the U.S. tomorrow. Ooh. Of course, that report was yesterday, and today there doesn't appear to be a sign of a massive cyber attack. Of course, here in Hawaii, Spectrum Internet is so crappy, it would be kind of hard to tell the difference anyway. There may be a cyber attack underway. I wouldn't notice it. Now, this is very scary. This is coming out of Mass Private Eye. And according to a Lincoln Motor Company media release, their 2018 Lincolns will offer a complimentary clear biometric membership. Now, what this does is if you're driving to the airport, your car will pre-scan you for TSA pre-check. And somehow this information will be set to TSA, and you'll show up at the gate with your ID, and they'll just wave you on through. I got to tell you, I have a hard enough problems with the airport spying on me. I don't need my car doing it. Not that I could ever afford a Lincoln. That's really weird. I mean, they're wiring everything to keep an eye on us. It really is. We're becoming George Orwell's 1984. Eyes and ears are everywhere. And of course, the joke of this is the government has demonstrated repeatedly they can't make heads or tails of this vast flood of data, because they started out looking for a needle in a haystack and started adding a lot more hay. Anybody who works in computer engineering, programming, data management understands that the addition of data is linearly additive. But correlating amongst that data is an unlimited mathematical expansion. In other words, 10 times as much data, 1,000 times as much correlation. I'm just picking the numbers out of thin air. It depends on how the data is structured. But that's the problem. With the amount of data they're capturing from the American people, there isn't enough compute power on this planet to make sense of it. And looking at the high quality of government computer software, Obamacare, it's highly probable that any systems they have aren't putting out good results anyway. Another huge boondoggle waste of our tax money. Now, over in Israel, which, by the way, has the highest per capita population of hackers of any nation on the planet, there's a 7-year-old Israeli firm. It was founded by 3 veterans of Israel's military intelligence unit, and it's raking in millions selling CIA tier, meaning high-quality hacking software to governments around the world. They've got 200 employees, sales arm in Bethesda, Maryland, imagine my surprise, and a long list of clients identified by watchdogs which have dubious civil rights records. Now, this NSO group charges $500,000 plus $65,000 per phone to completely hack and infiltrate a device with their flagship Pegasus software suite. So apparently they're able to get into any smartphone anywhere using tools which may have come from the CIA. Remember, a lot of that stuff got dumped on the dark web. So spying on people is now big business. I wonder what would happen if I put together a company that tried to provide truly private communications. Oh, you can't do that. You can't do that. The government has to have a back door. We're afraid of all you people. That's why we haven't listened to you. Stop doing things that makes the people angry. Seems like a simple solution to me. No, we have to go on doing things that make you angry. We're the government. That's what we do. More war. Apparently, Google is appointing a staff of 10,000 people. Actually, they're adding 10,000 people to their staff tasked with tracking down what they call extremist content on YouTube, with Google deciding what constitutes extremism. And apparently, YouTube CEO Susan Wojcicki, I hope I pronounced that correctly, was out there saying there are bad actors that use YouTube to spread misleading, manipulate, harassment, and harm. Now, when they talk about misleading and manipulate, that's a subjective call. Because if you've got corporate media or government that is lying and somebody on YouTube is trying to point out that they're lying, YouTube could say, well, obviously the YouTube video is attempting to mislead and manipulate people into doubting the official story. So it's more censorship. And apparently this announcement came after British Prime Minister Theresa May put heavy pressure on social media companies to remove radical content. And again, the definition of radical appears to be very fluid. Twitter, if you go over to Twitter right now, according to this article in Investment Watch blog, apparently Twitter has set up its search algorithm so if you search for the word Nazi or racist, it brings up President Donald Trump as the top result in the people category. That's childish. Let's be honest. That's just childish. Here's another story out of the Register in Great Britain. And this gets back to the concerns that are already being raised about the coming special election in Alabama. Expert gives Congress solution to vote machine cybersecurity fears. Keep a paper backup. Now, this is from Dr. Matt Blaze. He's a University of Pennsylvania computer sciences professor and a cryptographer. And he testified to Congress about cyber threats facing voting machines. Now, of course, the context here is how do we keep Russia from messing with our elections? Well, it's a general question. How do you keep anybody from messing with our elections, such as W. Wasserman Schultz, just to pick a name out of thin air. And Dr. Matt Blaze came on back and said, you can't rely on purely electronic voting machines to log the votes accurately. And there's got to be a verifiable paper trail, which everybody has been saying all along, including Bev Harris over there at blackboxvoting.org. But it's amazing that all of these electronic voting machines are set up to not keep a record. Makes it seem like they want to hide something. And by the way, as long as I'm talking about Bev Harris and as long as we're talking about yet another possibly crooked election in Alabama, you need to hunt down and watch this HBO documentary, Hacking Democracy. And it focuses heavily on Bev Harris and black box voting. And the very last segment of the show is where Bev Harris and her experts go into an elections commission office/warehouse. They pick a voting machine at random, and without even touching the machine, their experts change the outcome of a demonstration election. And the thing that really came on out from that segment was one of the people who worked for that election commission. She broke into tears. She had been absolutely convinced that she was part of an honest, fair, verifiable, unriggable election system, and it just hit her very hard to realize how wide open it was. But there's no reason not to have a paper record. Now, the first electronic voting machines, one of the first came out from the Diebold Corporation. And Diebold had built their reputation on automated bank teller machines that never lost a penny from one end of the country to the other. And when you used one of those machines, you could hear in the back that little printer going off on the paper tape to record the transaction. So why did they not include that feature in the voting machine? And of course, ultimately, Bev Harris discovered on a wide open, unsecured FTP server the source code for Diebold's software called the GEM system, and identified 12 different ways the election results could be altered without leaving a trace. Now, for the same company that created that amazing automated teller machine to come up with an electronic voting machine that wide open to fraud suggests it was deliberate. But there should be a paper trail. And again, Donald Trump's Commission on Election Integrity, it's another disappointment, an empty promise. Donald Trump, by his inaction, is going to allow the Democrats to steal the Congress next year, and then he's going to be in serious, serious trouble. Because they're still talking impeachment. Now, the last attempt early this week got shot down because they didn't really have anything on him. But at the very least, if the Democrats control Congress after next year's elections, then Donald Trump is going to be totally paralyzed. He's going to be dealing with an obstructionist Congress that will not let him accomplish anything, just so they can go into 2020 saying, look, Donald Trump didn't do anything worthwhile. That's why you have to vote for the Democratic candidate, Hillary Rotten Clinton. I think she's going to run again. I really do here. Now, all the way back in 1996, Monsanto advertised glyphosate as biodegradable, and Monsanto was sued for false advertising fraud in New York. Monsanto lost and had to remove the biodegradable label from its product. Well, apparently they learned nothing from that incident because they've been caught doing false advertising again regarding what is inside glyphosate and how long it takes to degrade once it's in the ground. But that makes money, and that makes it all okay. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And a very alert listener just wrote on in, following up on my pointing out once again that on that yearbook inscription that Gloria Allred was waving around while being very vague about its provenance, it's now been admitted that Beverly Nelson herself wrote the inscription with the date and Old Hickory House. And I pointed out there are two different color inks being used, but the last name of Moore is in the same color ink as the part Nelson now admits she wrote. And the rest of it up and including the first name is written in a much darker ink. And somebody wrote on in and said, take a very good look at that first name because it looks more like Ray than Roy. And it's really hard, you know, to say definitively, but yeah, there's a case to be made that it was actually somebody named Ray who wrote the original yearbook inscription, and they said, close enough, we'll go with that to create this fake. All right, we're going to take a couple of phone calls, but again, we're going to shut off the phone lines at the top of the hour when Lady Claire comes on. Dave in Missouri, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I would sure like to be able to say I love you to Lady Claire, so make sure she knows that. Aloha and howdy.
Howdy.
Hey, Mike. Howdy, brother. Hey, man, we made it in off the road. I want to tell a quick story to you. So, you know, there's a part of Hitler legacy that people don't know. I am at my wife's folks' 1,000-acre farm in rural Missouri. Now, her daddy is Romanian, Ukrainian. Her mother is Latvian. When Hitler invaded the Soviet Union in World War II, you know, pushed his way to Moscow, and the winter beat him. If you didn't die stopping Hitler as he came through, Stalin killed you on the way out. That is true communism. I mean, communism has killed 150 million people in the last century. You know,
well, I think it would be more accurate to say that communist leaders have killed these people, not communism in and of itself.
It would. Now, please let me finish this quick point here. So, as Hitler was being pushed out of the former Soviet Union, which you know was not was not a voluntary union, but a conquered union. You know, it wasn't that Romania, Latvia, Czechoslovakia, Poland, all of them voted to join Stalin. That's not how that worked. So as Stalin was pushing Hitler's armies out, Hitler evacuated hundreds of thousands of Latvians, Czechs, Poles, Romanians, Ukrainians. And so my wife's parents, who are now, the father's 94, the mother's 90, met in a German concentration camp.
We've got 1 minute to the break.
Evacuating. Okay, well, you might want to hold me over because this is big. Anyway,
no, I can't hold you over. I've already got a call that's being held over into Claire's time, okay? So please try and wrap it up.
Okay, well,
make your point.
Okay, so they met in a German concentration camp where they were clothed, housed, fed. They had PT time. Now, ultimately, they had a choice: Australia or America. They came to America, went to Chicago, wound up in rural Missouri, where they both worked, raised 6 kids. They now have a 1,000-acre farm. You know, it's the American dream. That only happens in America. Sherry in Texas made the point that communist China, they take care of their people with forced abortions, with forced labor, with Christians and labor camps.
Okay, you know something? We have to take our break now here, and a lot of what you said sounds more like Cold War propaganda than accuracy. I mean, they were talking forced abortions in this country in the 1930s and again in the 1970s. So it's not like it's really black and white. It's shades of gray. Thank you for the call. We're going to let you go. We've got to take a break for station identification. We'll be back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And for those of you watching on BAM User, the gorgeous creature sitting next to me is the lovely Lady Claire. And we've had quite a few people call on in with belated congratulations on the anniversary. And before we take our last phone call, I do want to, I have a comment in response to Dave where he's out there ragging on communism about how all these people are being killed. Experts are estimating that since the end of World War II, the U.S. government has killed 30 million people. So it's not like we're good and they're bad. It's naive, and like I said, it sounds like it's right out of the Cold War propaganda. And again, no system is necessarily good or evil. It's the people who rise to the top of it. All right. So anyway, with that being said, we're going to take one more phone call from Keith in Montana. Aloha, Keith. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I wanted to talk to you about Monsanto, but I'll add to something to what you just said there. The United States has no problem buying products from communist China or all the rice they do from communist Vietnam. I mean, the double speak in the word communism today. It's okay in corporate business, but it's not as far as world policy. But anyway, Mike, have you and Claire and hello, Lady Claire there. Have you guys seen the new Newsbud video on the turkey calling for the arrest of the CIA agent?
Yes, I have.
Did you notice in that video where he went on to link the Sarnev brothers as being his uncle? And aside from that and the whole details of it, he went into the Monsanto details over in Europe and about extending their 5-year permit. But what was interesting to note was the adjuvants used that they do not declare, and the biogenics portion of Monsanto.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's more than just a weed killer.
Well,
yes.
Yeah, it's pretty obvious. It's a very dangerous chemical, and it may turn out to be another case, as was the issue with aspartame, where they had a chemical that originally served a weapons purpose, and they decided, well, we can make more money with it if we turn it into something else and sell it to everybody. Because aspartame was originally considered a biological weapon and a neurotoxin. It's an excitotoxin. It triggers neurons into overfiring until they exhaust their neurotransmitters and stop functioning. But Donald Rumsfeld, prior to being Secretary of Defense, when he was with Searle, lobbied the U.S. government to get it approved as an artificial sweetener. And that's why we have aspartame today, which is something I have to avoid because it's also a migraine trigger. Probably because it is an excitotoxin.
Yeah.
Anyway, anything else there, Keith?
Yeah, today's my birthday. You can say happy birthday.
Oh,
happy birthday.
birthday.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Get plastered, you bastard. Happy birthday to you.
But seriously, have a great day and a wonderful year, okay?
Yeah, you two over there too, okay? And I think we're going to get some snow here. Anyway, my best to you guys and good show.
All right. Thanks so much.
All right, yeah, they're getting snow all over the place. All right, we're going to close the phone lines now, and it's time to turn the show over to Claire.
Well, I have read a number of interesting articles today and this week, and one of the most thought-provoking was AI building AI. Is man losing more control over artificial intelligence?
I'd say yes.
Yeah, and at what point do we become irrelevant to their lives on Earth?
Oh, they're always going to need repairmen. You need somebody to pay the electric bill.
Yeah, I guess so, at least in a limited way. But it is something that gives one cause for thought.
Well, we've already lost control over a major part of our world to computers already, and that's the economy. Because of all these very powerful computers and high-frequency trading algorithms, most of the major economic decisions are already being made by computers who are programmed for one thing only, the acquisition of as much wealth as possible, as quickly as possible, to the exclusion of any other considerations, such as whether the product or service being offered is actually a benefit to society. And as a result, these executives of these corporations may act like they're masters of the universe, but they're just along for the ride.
Yeah, that's pretty obvious. I would like to move over now to the world of medicine. Apparently, the FDA just approved a smart pill, antidepressant, so the government can track you as they force medicate you. And what this is called is Abilify MySight, and it's a pill with a sensor that digitally tracks if patients have ingested their medication. And it was approved for sale in mid-November. Now, a month after the drug's approval, several of the world's leading medical doctors are questioning the ethics surrounding the controversial drug. And I think we have a shout-out coming up.
Yes, we're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are rejoining the network.
And presumably using compliance with taking prescribed medication as justification, the drug has an ingestible sensor embedded in the pill that records when the medication was taken. Abilify MySite was approved for the treatment of schizophrenia, acute treatment of manic and mixed episodes associated with bipolar disorder, and for use as an add-on treatment for depression in adults. And Abilify is a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, SSRI.
Oh, those work wonderfully.
Yeah, right, as we have seen. A class of drugs which by law must contain the following black box label for consumers. And it says that this stuff should never be given to elderly patients with dementia-related psychosis treated with antipsychotic drugs, and they're at increased risk of death. Not approved for the treatment of patients with dementia-related psychosis, increased risk of suicidal thinking and behavior in children, adolescents, and young adults taking antidepressants, and the doctors are supposed to monitor for worsening and emergence of suicidal thoughts and behaviors.
Well, how the doctor's going to do that? It takes you 3 weeks to get an appointment.
Yeah, I know. And it's been linked to serious impulse control problems in patients. And in May of 2016, the FDA issued a warning to consumers about the drug's dangers associated with compulsive and impulsive behavior. According to the FDA, taking Abilify can lead to the following behaviors, among others: pathological gambling, side effect, and but the description does not entirely reflect the nature of the impulse-controlled risk that we identified.
Yeah, so I swear to God, Judge, the reason I attacked that woman is I was on Abilify.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not guilty. I'm innocent here.
Yeah, and now they are forcing people to take it with something that tracks they're taking it.
Yes.
And I think that this is the worst form of chemical hijacking. Just absolutely terrible.
It absolutely is.
Yeah. I'd like to talk a little bit about China, and now today is Friday, and those huge exercises are done with between the South Koreans and the U.S.
Yes.
And nothing has gone bang yet. But the Chinese state media on North Korean border is telling its citizens to prepare for nuclear war. What do they know that we don't? Jilin Daily, a local Chinese state newspaper from the Jilin border region with North Korea, published a guide Wednesday on how to behave in the event of a nuclear attack. Now, they didn't name North Korea specifically, but the national propaganda outlet Global Times published a piece explaining that the government felt the guide necessary as assumptions increase on possible clashes on the Korean peninsula. They think it's going to happen, Mike.
Well, don't forget they've been issuing the same warnings here in Hawaii.
Yeah.
I just hope that China used some other source for advice for their citizens than that duck and cover movie
not going to help.
We all had with Bert the Turtle.
Yeah.
Oh, if a nuclear bomb goes off over your head, just pull the picnic cloth over your head and you will be safe.
Yeah, you know. And the article went on to talk about various kinds of nuclear weapons and protections against them. And according to the South China Morning Post, the Mandarin language article urged residents of Jilin to close their windows and doors in an emergency and immediately take a shower and wash their mouths and ears after being exposed to radiation. Michael, how valid is that? And
it's going to help. It would have been better if they said more a case of rinse, because if you take a sponge or a washcloth and you're scrubbing your skin, you're going to drive the particles into your skin.
Not a good idea.
Actually,
idea.
What you would really need is like a complete exfoliation.
Yeah. And another very interesting article about North Korea comes to us from The Guardian. Apparently, North Korea has signaled its openness to direct talks with the U.S., which Russia's Sergei Lavrov, who I, by the way, believe to be an absolute adult in the room in terms of international relations. And apparently they want to talk to us over the nuclear standoff. And he said he passed the message to his counterpoint, Rex Tillerson, when the two diplomats met in Vienna on Thursday. Now, there was no immediate response from Tillerson, but the official position of the State Department is that the North Korean government would have to show itself to be serious about giving up its nuclear arsenal as part of a comprehensive agreement before a dialogue could begin.
Well, of course, North Korea is not going to do that.
No.
Because every time a country has surrendered their weapons as a condition for talks with the United States, the talks end with an invasion. They did it to Libya. They did it to Iraq. They did it to Syria. They're getting ready to do it to Iran. So no. If North Korea wants to talk, it's basically to say, you know, we're now a peer. We're a nuclear nation.
Yeah.
You will not invade us. We will make it cost more than it's worth.
Yeah, yeah. And apparently Lavrov conveyed the apparent offer on the day a top UN official, Jeffrey Feltman, met the North Korean Foreign Minister Ri Yong-ho in Pyongyang during the first high-level UN visit to the country for about 6 years. Feltman is an American and former U.S. diplomat, but the State Department stressed he was not in North Korea with any message from Washington. And analysis, it looks like this. As North Korea's latest launch shows increased missile capability, we chart the country's progress in developing a nuclear weapon that can credibly threaten the U.S. We know that North Korea wants, above all, to talk to the United States about guarantees for security. We are ready to support that. We are ready to take place in facilitating such negotiations, Lavrov said in an international conference. Russia, again, showing that they can be flexible, that they can create dialogue, and possibly some meaningful results.
As opposed to head-on confrontation, which is the U.S. style.
Yeah, you know, don't beat the other guys up. Let's sit down. Let's talk, you know. And another little article on the Korean standoff. South Korea apparently is demanding control of U.S. military to instill fear in North Korea. I would say very gently to the South Korean leadership, Mike, that's going to happen when pigs discover their aerodynamic. Ain't going to happen.
Well, especially with the new president of South Korea really not wanting the military to be there.
Yeah.
I think probably their goal there in having direct control of the U.S. military is to hold them back.
Yeah, and prevent something stupid from happening.
Yes.
I agree entirely. And I can understand that. I don't think it's going to happen. What do you think?
I agree. The United States is not going to relinquish control of their forces to anybody. They've done it to a small degree with NATO. They've done it to a large degree with Israel, which is very scary. Israel actually has direct control of American military assets, including some of our nuclear weapons.
Yes, that could cause one to lose more than a little sleep at night. I'd like to go over to something else that Russia is doing. They are proposing a Syrian reconciliation scenario to Libya. Firas Khalidi, a member of the Syrian opposition's High Negotiation Commission, welcomed Thursday Russia's call for holding direct negotiations between the delegations of the Syrian government and the country's opposition in Geneva.
Note that the United States was not really invited to that.
No, definitely not, because it is in Syria against the wishes of the Syrian government.
Yes.
It is an occupation of a sovereign nation, wrong and bad completely. And the people in the opposition are really respecting what the Russians are having to say about this. And the statement was made, for the first time we feel that Russia exerts serious pressure on the delegation of the Syrian regime in order to bring it to the political process, Khalidi told Sputnik.
Well, what's going on is there is a legitimate opposition in Syria, just like there's a legitimate opposition in virtually every country, including this one.
Yeah.
But the U.S. seized on that as their shield, and then upped the ante by sending in ISIS and Al-Qaeda.
Yeah.
And, of course, ISIS and Al-Qaeda's agenda was Assad must go, Assad must go, Assad must go, which was not coincidentally the position being echoed by Washington, D.C. Well, ISIS and Al-Qaeda are now gone. And Syria is back to a Syrian government and a political opposition that wants a larger voice in running the nation. And I think Assad has already indicated his willingness to work politically with the opposition and maybe bring them into the government.
That was a smart move on his behalf.
And of course, the U.S. tried to prevent that with ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and so Russia is now gluing that back together. And so for the second time in Syria, Russia has yanked the rug out from underneath U.S. intentions. And how the United States is going to respond is very hard to predict right now, especially with the utter recklessness of Donald Trump's announcement on Jerusalem, because the United States wants to stay in Syria, and I don't think they entertain serious ideas that they can still prevail but I think they want to avoid having to admit they lost this one, even though that's the opinion of pretty much everybody around the world.
Yeah. And apparently this came directly from Russian President Vladimir Putin, and the Congress will aim at adopting final documents on reconciliation and creating a committee that will draft a new constitution. All of that seems to be, you know, pretty straight up and straightforward to me.
Again, Assad and the opposition were already talking about this 6 years ago.
Yeah.
The U.S. came on in and said, we're all for it. The only difference is Assad has to go.
Yeah. Yeah. And apparently all Syrian ethnic groups and religious sects, as well as opposition factions from Syria and abroad, have been invited to participate. This is let's build a big house.
Yes.
Let's work together. Apparently the UN, the ICRC, Health Charity, and the World Health Organization are expected to act as observers. And this, to me, sounds like a positive move toward a future for Syria. That
this is
it's,
Putin playing statesman yet again.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. And we have the following news, which is Arab-backed forces seize Yemen coastal area.
Saudi-backed forces.
Seize Yemen.
Well, so much for Donald Trump's call for Saudi Arabia to lift that blockade.
Not happening. Saudi warplanes continue to pound the Yemeni capital city of Sana'a at a huge rate yesterday, which is something that I predicted. If the starvation and the bombing runs and the illnesses, now they've not only got cholera to deal with in Yemen, they've got diphtheria. And no medical help on the ground whatsoever. People are dying. Children are dying horribly. This does not make me happy. And reports of the Kuka district on the Red Sea coast of Yemen say that pro-Saudi forces have more or less entirely captured the area, which includes a town and a small fishing port. At least 25 were killed in the fighting. The district isn't of that much value, but the push is in keeping with the Saudi-led efforts to conquer as much of the Yemeni coast as possible to ensure that shipments of food and medicine into the country are more or less exclusively under their control, meaning ain't gonna happen. Is not going to happen whatsoever.
So my earlier assessment of Donald Trump's call for Saudi Arabia to lift the blockade, he just issued that statement to try and counter the psychological impact of the announcement on Jerusalem. Not really going to happen.
No, definitely not. And the UN Humanitarian Coordinator for Yemen, Jamie McGoldrick, says that there has been no progress seen with respect to the Saudi blockade of Yemen, adding that there have been 15 aid ships, mostly laden with food and fuel. They're just parked off the coast. They can't get permission to reach the port. And yet, the White House officials are saying that they believe actions are taking place which will lead to the Saudis opening up the ports to the humanitarian aid.
And by the way, the new ice skating rink has just opened in hell.
Right, right.
All right, we got to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and take it away, Lady Claire. I'm just going to kick back and relax. It's Pauhana Friday.
Yes.
You do the show.
Okay, all right.
All right.
I have to tell all of our readers and listeners I am profoundly disturbed by President Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Now, we knew it was coming. There were bits and pieces that were kind of planted in advance. And we know sort of why this happened, which was something that I believe President Trump promised Sheldon Adelson he would do if he got elected.
Well, Sheldon Adelson was pushing for this, and so was Netanyahu, and so was AIPAC, and so was Jared Kushner.
Yeah.
But again, as president, we are hoping for decisions that take the wider view of what's going on. And as I mentioned earlier in the show, looking at the reactions from the Middle Eastern nations, and Putin's already down there, he's visiting Egypt, and he's visiting Turkey, that Donald Trump has succeeded in pivoting in a single chunk the entire Mideast away from the United States and toward Russia. And all these Arab nations are getting together to decide what they might do about this. Now, we're not talking military action here because Israel does have nuclear weapons. But those Arab nations, they've got the oil. And they could declare a mass embargo against the United States at the same time they drop the petrodollar. And that would be a blow the United States could not survive.
I just, some of you may have seen the film Wreck-It Ralph. And unfortunately, when it comes to Middle Eastern peace, we seem to have a Wreck-It Donald in the White House. Yep. I think that analogy can very easily be done.
Yep.
And I have to wonder if President Trump actually realized what the nature and the shape of the ramifications of this choice would be.
Well, as I mentioned earlier in the show, if Donald Trump intended to set the Mideast on fire, he's just done a good job.
Yeah.
If he didn't intend to do it and didn't realize what was going to happen, that shows basically poor quality thinking. He's just out there to take care of his friends, and again, very clearly did not appreciate the scale that the reaction was going to be. I mean, they've inflamed all of the world's Muslims, many of whom are now, thanks to the open borders policies, within reaching distance of Americans, in the United States and Europeans in Europe. And already the State Department, without specifically naming Israel or anything, is saying Americans traveling abroad are now a target. And so basically with this one move, Donald Trump has made Americans a target of Muslim anger, and Netanyahu has made all of the world's Jewish people targets for Muslim anger. And
we can go a little further than this. President Trump has painted a huge red target on the backs of every American service person.
Yes.
Here, abroad, and especially those who are serving in the Middle East right now.
Yes.
I mean, this really concerns me.
So if there is an increase in terror attacks or IEDs killing our young people in uniform, we know who to blame for it.
Yeah, you know. And speaking in Gaza on Thursday, Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh said, "We should call for and we should work on launching an intifada in the face of the Zionist enemy." He said, "We want the uprising to last and continue to let Trump and the occupation regret this decision." And apparently there have been violent protests in the West Bank and on the Gaza-Israel border, stones being hurled at anti-riot troops, and Israeli troops turned water cannons and fired tear gas.
Well, deaths are now being reported as well.
Yeah.
So this is escalating. This is not even beginning to show the signs of plateauing, let alone declining. I think it's just going to get worse from here. And again, we still don't know what response is going to be organized by the foreign ministers of all of these Arab nations, on whom we are greatly dependent for oil.
Yeah, that is going to be a very interesting get-together. But I think that they are going to be motivated to work together unilaterally, which is sometimes a little difficult for leaders of Middle Eastern countries to do. But I think they're going to speak with one voice with this.
U.S. foreign policy has been to keep them at odds with each other, and I think most of them are smart enough to realize that. But with Turkey clearly pivoting away from the U.S., Turkey was one of our major allies in the region to keep the area under control. And now Turkey has pivoted away, and Turkey is talking about what a terrible decision Trump made regarding Jerusalem.
Yeah, I think we're going to see more, and in fact, we have seen demonstrations in Muslim Asian countries like Malaysia.
Yes.
You know, and they're coming out against this decision. I mean, the protests so far have been peaceful.
We're seeing Orthodox Jews and devout regular Jews are denouncing this as well. The only people who think this is a really good idea was the government of Israel and the war hawks everywhere and Donald Trump's supporters. But the condemnation from around the world. The only exception is the Czech government is saying they're considering following suit and recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital, at which point Netanyahu put on his tap shoes and said, "See, the world is with us, the world is with us." We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha America, welcome back to the show here. A very appropriate piece of bump music on that one. So, Claire, please continue.
Well, it's also noted that hundreds have taken part in protests in Iran, where the state TV aired footage of marchers chanting "Death to America" and "Death to Israel" while holding up Palestinian flags and banners. And they're going to be having hundreds more police in Jerusalem's Old City today as further conflicts are feared. And back in Iraq, Iraqi militia says Trump's recognition of Jerusalem is a legitimate reason to attack Americans. Hello. We still have a lot of military over there.
Gee, thanks an awful lot there, Don.
Yeah, you know. And Russia Today is reporting that the Shia paramilitary group Harakat Hezbollah al-Nujaba has declared that the U.S.'s violation of the Holy Land status quo is a legitimate reason to attack Americans.
Oh, boy.
You know, one has to wonder how he came to this decision without really understanding any of the ramifications, both in the Middle East and beyond.
Either his advisors didn't tell him this was what was going to happen, because they too are on board with the pro-Israel agenda, or he wasn't listening to them. And either way, that's a very, very dangerous situation.
Yeah.
Because the last administration we had seemed to get by on wishful thinking.
Yes.
And look what a mess they made.
Yes. And apparently, a Palestinian official has said Trump's declaration has effectively precluded the possibility of a two-state solution.
Well, maybe, yes. They may be jumping the gun, because we're hearing from all these other nations in the Middle East that they're going to now officially recognize the state of Palestine with its capital in East Jerusalem and just ignore the contiguous land issue, given that the settlements in the West Bank are illegal. Their new idea is they should be taken down and the land given back to Palestine anyway. Israel, of course, is going to fight that tooth and nail. Nikki Haley up at the United Nations is going to veto anything the Security Council does, and that may actually lead to outright military action. But again, Israel's holding that ace card. They've got the nuclear weapons.
Yeah. What really concerns me is that this has given a certain empowerment, if you will, to Netanyahu, who is kind of losing his base. But it's also a fear factor, which Netanyahu likes to use to hold the Israeli people together.
I don't know that Netanyahu is getting a boost from this, because we're seeing, again, from all these ordinary religious Jews and Orthodox Jews, they don't agree with it. And again, the fear factor, they have to realize that it's Trump and Netanyahu that have just made the world a more fearful place. It's not the Muslims who have done it, who've kicked off this thing. It's Trump and Netanyahu. So I don't think the politics are going to go quite the way that Netanyahu is hoping. And again, he's desperate to get off the hook with this corruption deal. And desperate men take desperate chances, and sometimes they do some pretty reckless things.
Yep, they do. One thing that I'm concerned about, and we haven't really discussed this, the Al-Aqsa Mosque.
Yes.
I am very concerned that the IDF is going to be given orders by Netanyahu to completely close it off to Muslim worshippers and ultimately demolish it. Because isn't that the area where the third temple theoretically should be built?
Well, that's where Israel says it should be built. And here's one of the historical ironies. What they call the remains of the Second Temple, on which the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock are built, is actually the remains of an old Roman fort called Fort Antonio. And even Israeli archaeologists have now concluded that the actual site of the First and Second Temple is on nearby Mount Moriah. It's just a little bit off to the southeast, you know, a stone's throw away, but it's not that exact spot. So, I mean, to me, the solution is obvious. Build your third temple on Mount Moriah and leave the Muslims their holy sites. But again, Israel doesn't like to share. Palestine has indicated they'll share Jerusalem. They'll have East Jerusalem for their capital, and Israel can have the rest of Jerusalem for their capital. But Israel's attitude is, no, we get it all. God gave it to us. Go away.
And they're going to take it all, Mike.
Well,
they're going to try.
They are, but if the instant they do anything to the Al-Aqsa Mosque or the Dome of the Rock, they're not going to be able to contain the reaction and the rage.
I don't think so. I think this is going to be a very bad move, but they may make it.
You know, Netanyahu could go on in there and just order the mosque and the dome just to be shelled from a distance. Because technically that area is under the control of a Muslim commission. And Israel's legal authority there is limited. But again, they're operating outside the law here.
And apparently Israeli fighter jets have hit targets in Gaza Strip, predictable, after the Day of Rage protests, and I would suggest that this kind of military stuff is going to continue to come down.
I like this quote. A projectile was fired from the Gaza Strip and was intercepted by Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system. Well, that tells us whatever the projectile was, it was not built by the Gazans.
No.
Because those homemade Qassam rockets don't fly straight, and it's almost impossible to hit them with Iron Dome. So whatever was fired out of Gaza was a modern, factory-produced weapon of some kind.
Yeah.
A false flag.
Yeah. And so far, and this is coming from Russia Today, at least 2 Palestinians have been killed and more than 760 injured during this day of rage.
I think it's more than that. I mean, the numbers are updating constantly here. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and take a phone call from W down in Texas. And aloha, W. What's on your mind?
Yes, can you hear me?
We hear you just fine. You're on the air. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I wanted to make the point about net neutrality again. It looks like, the powers that will be controlling that, the ISPs, the telecom, they have the opportunity to throttle websites, to potentially even outright censor websites. So, that's not bad enough. And of course you have all the search engines and so forth doing the same thing. So now you have a bunch of different entities, basically with the power to censor the internet to a level not seen before, which is bad. It's just simply bad, awful.
Yeah, but it's not going to work in the long run. It's not going to work in the long run. You already have other countries are talking about setting up their own internet that is basically going to deny control by the U.S. government. Here in the United States of America, you've already got communities are setting up their own community-supported internet, and already, of course, the ISPs are trying to lobby the courts and lobby the government to pass a law saying, no, you will only use our internet. But I don't think they're really going to have that much success. China tried to censor their internet, especially after Tiananmen Square, and people just found a way around it, and they'll do it here. All the censorship activity is going to do is get people to stop using their internet, including the commercial aspects of it, and they're going to go to alternative internets. Because anybody can set up an internet. The technology is well known. There's nothing proprietary about it at all. In fact, it was developed at U.S. taxpayer expense, and therefore it's technically the property of the American people.
I agree with what you're saying. I've seen a video of people in Detroit setting up their own Wi-Fi system. But
no, I'm not talking about Wi-Fi. I'm not talking about Wi-Fi. I'm talking about whole communities setting up their own community internet where everybody is communicating back and forth, and it never even goes out to the backbone corporations. Anyway, W, we're going to let you go because this phone connection is really bad and you are breaking up. So we're going to go back here to the lovely Lady Claire.
There was an article that I saw today from when the hits the fan plan, Michael Snyder, and it's part of a series. And he says, expect desperate, insane behavior from the U.S. government in 2018. And
I expect desperate, insane behavior from the government
all the
time.
Yeah. And he believes very strongly that Donald Trump may be pushing to entangle this nation in an escalating and increasingly disastrous conflict in the Middle East. The signs are everywhere.
He sure got a good start to that.
Oh, last Wednesday, absolutely. And Snyder says that confrontation with Iran has been the holy grail for neocons for decades, but it's becoming increasingly likely under Trump. And since he wrote the other articles, the situation has escalated. And Trump has decided to attach himself even more clearly to the hip of crazed Saudi princeling Mohammed bin Salman and Israel.
Well definitely on that latter one, but because of what Trump did with Jerusalem, Saudi Arabia is now pivoting away.
Yeah.
They have soundly criticized this decision.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned, Mike, the question is, what are they going to do about it? What can they do about it other than to go to the pipelines?
Well, that would be their best option. I mean, even with all those Arab nations united together, a military attack on Israel would be responded to both with Israel's nuclear weapons and U.S. nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
But again, those Arab nations, they might just decide, on a complete boycott, or rather an embargo of oil to the United States, coupled with abandoning the petrodollar system. And that would be a 1-2 punch that would really wreck a lot of things here in the United States.
Yeah. And it will be interesting to see how things play out over the weekend and into next week, and what the growing ramifications of this decision by President Trump will be. And unfortunately, just because something is the most ham-fistedly, pig-headedly stupid thing this country could do is not a guarantee that it won't do it. And that scares me about American foreign policy.
It scares me as well. And over past administrations, I've made the observation that the quality of thinking coming out of the various administrations does seem to be very, very poor. That it's all about an immediate need, an immediate agenda, an idea that sounds really good in the elevator pitch, and either a good, careful analysis of its outcomes is not being done, or it's being done and simply being ignored because of political reasons. But again, the U.S. has just made a mess of the entire Middle East, and it's about to get worse. The U.S. is making a mess of the entire world right now. And there doesn't seem to be any end in sight other than a military defeat for the United States or the collapse of the U.S. government, probably both.
And what Snyder feels is that an aggressive posture against Iran in the Middle East will lead to another huge fail, sparking a more serious collapse in the U.S. empire, and ultimately Iranian domination of the region. Crazy? He says he also heard that Brexit had no shot and that Trump couldn't win. When it comes to conventional wisdom at this point in the historical cycle, I want to be short. First, the U.S. doesn't have the position it thinks it has in the world any longer. The moral authority, irrespective of whether it was deserved in the first place, is gone, and especially with this decision by President Trump.
Well, we had that politician over in Germany the other day who just came right on out and said, it's obvious that America's influence in the world is in decline. And the world should be turning to Europe, specifically to Germany, for guidance into the future.
And empires, he writes that empires always make increasingly stupid decisions toward the end, driven by hubris and a lack of self-awareness, and the U.S. the U.S. is no different here.
Well, what's going on is what used to work, what worked back in the 50s and 60s, isn't working anymore. And so everybody's out there saying, well, let's try a new idea. Let's come up with something else. And all that's left are the really over-the-top, over-the-shark, out there ideas. And somebody says, well, we got to do something, so let's try this. And this turns out to be another disaster, and it just accelerates things. So I think we're into the end game, the final chapter of the history of the United States of America, and I think we're heading toward a Soviet Union-style collapse. And what we, as the American people, need to be ready to do when it happens is stand up and say, thank you very much. We will decide the nature of the government that comes to this land next, because there's going to be all kinds of carpetbaggers coming on in and saying, we've got yourself a new government here, just sign your name on the dotted line, we'll set up a new private central bank, and everything will be just hunky-dory.
And the other thing that Snyder mentions is that the U.S. would be getting into bed if, he's talking about Saudi Arabia, with a complete and total lunatic when it comes to de facto Saudi leader MBS. Pretty much everything this guy touched turned to, well, shall we say, excrement, with his campaign in Yemen and attempting to isolate Qatar being prime examples. Now with his mass arrests of Saudi princes and other powerful people, family members, in a quest to firm up his position, he's lost even more credibility in the region and created a slew of dangerous enemies who are not going to forget what this guy did to him, ever.
Along with consolidating his power, apparently Crown Prince bin Salman, looking at the Saudi treasury, simply said, well, we're just going to plunder our own billionaires. Because all those people who were arrested, they were all let go as long as they signed over the majority of their fortune to the Saudi government. And at this point, I would say he's definitely, probably a lot of people are thinking about just assassinating him at this point. So I wouldn't want to be underwriting his life insurance.
No, I sort of wouldn't either. But there seemed to be an incredible simpatico between this guy and Kushner.
Apparently, but Kushner does read like he's an Israeli asset, no question.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
and,
definitely.
Again, I thought it was rather tasteless nepotism for Trump to bring him into the White House in the first place.
Yeah.
You know, you're not supposed to hire your family into a political job, but that's exactly what he did.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Ivanka, too.
Well, I thought she quit. She stepped back and went back to...
No, she was just at a very recent conference on women's issues in India. So, yeah.
As an official representative of the government,
yes.
or just as Ivanka Trump?
I believe as a representative.
Okay, because I remember there'd been a backlash when he hired her, and there was talk about where she was going to leave her official position at the White House, but she can still be an ambassador at large without being an issue.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're coming up here on a commercial break. Have you got something short to share with us here?
I have something a little long, so I'm not going to share it yet. I'm going to have to share it after the break.
All right. Well, then, let me grab something off of my talking points here.
Okay.
Barack Obama is out there saying that the U.S. absence from the Paris Agreement is only temporary, which suggests that he knows somehow Trump is not long for the White House. And... well, let's just cut on down to the chase. It's snowing in South Louisiana.
Oh, boy.
It's snowing in Austin.
Ooh.
Somebody took a photo of a snowman on the lawn of the Alamo. And we will be back after these few words.
Okay.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I don't know why that bump is always at the end of the show, because we're at the end of the show and we don't take phone calls here. So, Claire, you had one more story you wanted to share with us.
Yes. It's titled Silicon Valley's Working Homeless, showing how hard life is in Democrats' paradise. And, of course, we know Silicon Valley is the home to tech giants like Facebook, Apple, and Google. But unfortunately, it's also home to a surging working homeless population who live in dilapidated RVs, tents, and their own cars, basically because of policies enacted by the Democrats. And the surging number of those working in Silicon Valley and still unable to afford adequate housing should be a warning to big government, but it sure doesn't seem like anyone is taking notice as their taxes continue to rise. And as governments creep toward socialism, though, poverty becomes the norm, not the exception. And Silicon Valley has the highest median income in the nation, but a soaring tax burden and expensive regulations have caused housing prices to increase, which has also caused the homelessness to surge.
Well, that is pretty tacky when you're working for these companies and you have to live in your car even though you've got a full-time job there.
That's insane.
And it's another reminder that movie, The Interns, which is set at Google.
Yes.
And it's a fun movie. I really like it. And it makes Google look like it's the greatest place in the world to work.
Yep.
Apparently, it's another Hollywood myth.
Yeah. Yeah, very definitely.
And we're hearing all these horror stories about people who work for Amazon, about how they're being treated.
Yeah, just inhuman. Just inhuman.
Again, this kind of abuse of workers, fascism. Fascism on display.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And in our final moments, and we're heading into, I think Hanukkah is with us now, Christmas. I don't know about other religions who have significant celebrations in the month of December, but everyone out there...
It's the Feast of the Saturnalia.
Well, I wasn't really counting that, but I would like to invite and inspire everyone out there to just be a little kinder this December to yourselves, to your families. If you can even donate 1 can of food to the local food bank, that's going to keep someone going who wouldn't have without it. Just remember to be a little kinder this season.
Definitely going to do that.
Yeah.
All right, moving on down here and finding some other things to share with you. We were talking about how it's snowing in all these places, and apparently it's Winter Storm Benji, which makes it sound like it's not all that big a deal, but apparently it is. And up in Alaska, which, yes, they're supposed to be getting snow this time of year, but apparently they had 10 inches in a single hour, and it is one of the most extreme snowfall rates on record, where people basically would go into a movie theater and the streets were clear, and they came on out and their cars were just buried.
Wow.
So now apparently climate alarmists have been caught faking sea level rise data. They haven't given up selling us drowning polar bears and flooded coastlines. If you don't pay your carbon taxes, the world is doomed.
Yes, yes.
Hasn't happened yet. Anyway, there's the music. Time for us to get on out of here from our Pauhana Friday show. Please stay tuned for John Stedmiller. He's got a lot more interesting things to share with you. And we'll be back on Monday. So have a really good weekend, a good, safe weekend, and aloha, America.